Welcome to Module 2.3.2. In this module, we'll be discussing the different microorganisms and their role in the decomposition of those plant materials. So these microorganisms play a huge role. They are the things that are going to mix the soil and break down those materials. And remember that there are different components of that plant material, and each different microorganism plays a role in the degradation, right? So we talked about the quality of the residues, and we talked about the physical properties. So, maybe some of our macroorganisms that are breaking down or chewing on that leaf, like worms or ants that are taking that and using that particular material as for something, they do play a role in the decomposition of those plant materials. Some of our bacteria have the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen, which minimizes our reliance upon synthetic fertilizers. Unfortunately, as with everything, there are some good and some bad. And so some of these these organisms do cause plant diseases, and we have nematodes, which are actually going to decrease our crop production and cause economic loss. So you might hear terms like bioremediation, where we are using these soil micro and macroorganisms to break down these compounds so that we can minimize the impact of some of these chemicals that we have put into the environment. For waste disposal and degradation, if you can recall back, we were talking about septic tanks. It is these microorganisms that actually decompose or break down these different molecules, like that breaks down the soaps and the fats and the waxes that are produced or that are kind of the byproduct of our normal living. Like when you think about what goes into a septic system, obviously what goes in from the toilet, but what we don't think about is like the shampoo that goes down the drain, or the soap that goes down the drain, or when we wash dishes, the dish soap, the laundry detergent. How do you break those molecules down? And so these microorganisms that are inside of our septic systems are also going to play a huge role in the continuous movement and allowing us to live our lives as normal. So a little terminology, we have ecology, and this is going to be the study of organisms in the relation to the environment. And this is kind of a broad term. It says, how does every little organism interact with any other organism, whether it be plant, whether it be a microorganism? What is the role of that? Next, we have ecosystem. And that ecosystem is this community of those organisms. And so, we have different types of ecosystem, from forests to prairies to our agroecosystems. And these are ultimately going to contain a diversity of organisms, but that are also going to be living and improve soil health. So back to our carbon cycle. And remember that there are two components of the carbon cycle. There's photosynthesis and decomposition. So our photosynthetic organisms are our primary producers, but these are also going to serve as an energy source for these different microorganisms. And so a couple of other terms, we have detritus. And this detritus is really like the parent material. Was it a oak leaf? Was it a pine needle? Was it a soybean stalk? Was it a corn stalk? What was the basis for this, and where did that come from? Our soil fauna is going to be our animals or our heterotrophs. These animals or heterotrophs are going to feed on this plant material. Our microflora are going to be our microbes, or the microbial biomass. And then finally the soil humus. And the humus is going to have those nutrients. Remember, this is that organic matter, the fulvic acid, the humic acid, the humin. It's going to contain all those compounds, those phenolic rings that are going to also have some functional group of organic matter that is going to influence the adsorption of our nutrients. So increasing the CEC and making those available for not only the plants, but also for the microorganisms. When we're talking about these microorganisms, it's important to understand the different types of respiration that occur. And so we know that we have aerobic respiration and we have anaerobic respiration. And do you remember which one is greater? Would you expect more decomposition in an aerobic environment or an anaerobic environment? Aerobic. And so in these two environments, if we would have like an organism that is an obligate aerobe, it requires oxygen in order to perform its decomposition. We also have anaerobic or obligate anaerobes, that they can only perform their functions in the absence of oxygen. So when we think of obligate, we think we've obligated. It is, we need one specific type. We either need oxygen, we don't need oxygen. Facultative organisms are capable of either. So you can have an aerobic environment and then all of a sudden it becomes anaerobic, and those facultative organisms will still continue to function. We also have two different types or two different classes of organisms that, depending on the class, where they get their energy source from. And so autotrophs, meaning they don't need anything else in order to get their energy. We have like photoautotrophs, so plants are photoautotrophs. They don't have to consume anything in order to get energy. However, humans and animals and insects, we can't make our own energy, so we need to eat plants and animals and sometimes insects in order to get those energy sources, right? In order to get our carbohydrates and our fats and waxes and proteins and starches, so that we can have energy in order to function. So for our soil organisms, there are some things that also go into this, whether we have abiotic problems such as moisture or temperature. There can be some biotic components to that. So are those being eaten up? Like are the valuable insects being eaten up by some predator? And then also having competition within that niche. And then also that the soil chemical properties are going to play a role. And so this kind of goes back to the total organic carbon, in that if these chemical components are out of balance, then there won't be enough, then the environment's not conducive for these microorganisms to perform their functions to the best of their ability. And so that total soil biomass is going to be kind of dependent upon this organic matter. So the more organic matter is the food for the soil microbes. So if there's organic matter and there's an abundance of organic matter, then the soil microbes are going to basically eat and reproduce or regenerate. So we want to increase the organic matter so that we can increase the soil biomass. And then as we increase the soil biomass, we're going to increase nutrient cycling. As we increase nutrient cycling, we don't need to apply fertilizers as much, because the organic matter that's there is going to be decomposed or broken down, and those nutrients are going to be released back to the soil and held to the soil colloid, where the plant can then take that up. So we have three kind of main components, and this is kind of going back to biology, just to kind of talk about some of these organisms that are going to break down or decompose some of this material. So we have algae. These are going to be in wet environments. They like that. They like wet environments on the soil surface. They do perform a function. They are breaking some things down, but they're also really kind of decreasing the crop production of that particular soil, just because when they grow, like if you have algae, it's not the algae that's the problem. It's the environment that caused the algae that is the problem. You might see these lichens on trees. And so, this it has some symbiotic relationship. It looks nasty. It doesn't look ideal, but it's, it is providing some benefit to the tree. Or it's typically going to be on woody surfaces. Next, we have fungi. And so these fungi are going to decompose. Look at what these fungi decompose. They're going to decompose all of these very difficult or, especially this lignin. All these, if we go back to that, quality of the residues and the decomposition rates, at the top we have, those that decompose quickly are going to be our simple proteins and sugars. Those that decompose most slowly are going to be our lignins. And so you'll see fungi looking for the energy that is contained within these lignins. And so we have three types of fungi. We have yeasts. We have molds. And we have mushrooms. Each of these play a role. Molds are not likely to play a good role, except for penicillin. But this aspergillus and this fusarium are definitely issues that we have in our crop production. And it's mostly the environmental conditions that cause these problems. So aspergillus in corn is going to be an issue because it's going to basically kind of, eat the end of this corn off and kind of work its way down and eventually consume all the material inside of that corn. Charcoal rot disease, again, this is going to be the environmental conditions, and these are going to get in and actually decompose and break down the plant roots. If the plant roots don't work, the crop doesn't grow. If the crop doesn't grow, then it dies. So we need to come in and make sure that our environment is not conducive for these different fungi that can be detrimental to our crops. But what you might see are these fungi that are growing on trees. They're growing on dead stumps. They're growing on, especially in our forest kind of environments. We're seeing these mushrooms grow on these trees and start to decompose some of that stuff because that woody tissue contains the energy that they need in order to break that down. And, one of the things that you can see that kind of a clear indication that you have some fungi, at least the presence of fungi, are going to be like these fairy rains. And so sometimes this can be a good thing. Sometimes it can be a bad thing, depending on the environment that you're in. Like, we would not want to see this on a golf course. But in a soil or kind of a non-disturbed area, that's not used for agriculture or any kind of production, this is just kind of the natural progression of life in those systems. And so here we can see these mushrooms are starting to decompose this trunk. This is going to take time, obviously, but these are the types of organisms that break these types of materials down. We would not expect bacteria or algae to be breaking this material down. It's just not, it's not conducive for them. So on an oak tree, you might see some of this fungal hyphae in rye residue. Sometimes you can see this, looks like cobwebs early in the morning when there's enough moisture. That moisture allows those fungi to grow very quickly. And so those fungi will then kind of form this webbing material. And as that water kind of dries up throughout the day, you won't be able to see them as much. If you get an infection of this, especially in like our turf management systems, you will start to get a very quick takeover of your system. Like it can take over a golf green in a matter of a week, unless you do something about it. So those were kind of like the detrimental fungi, but we do have some fungi that kind of give us a benefit. And so you'll hear talking about mycorrhizal fungi, and they form a symbiosis with these plant roots that help nutrient uptake. So we have ectomycorrhiza, and these ectomycorrhiza form this fungal mantle around the roots, and they kind of act like a, you'll see in the next slide, it's more just kind of like growth, kind of like a, when I think about this, like maybe like a beard, right? It kind of grows on the outside of our face. Yeah, I know it comes out through the skin and through the pores, but it really kind of covers, just the outer part of that root. And then next we have endomycorrhiza. And so this endomycorrhiza is going to actually get into the plant and kind of form a very direct route to those cortical cells. And once that nutrient is into the cortical cells, you'll see in the next slide that it doesn't have to go through many of the routes that kind of slow or mediate nutrient uptake into the plants. So we have ectomycorrhiza that's going to be outside. We have endomycorrhiza that's going to be inside. So here we have this ectomycorrhiza, and you can see there's just going to be these little hairs that, they're going to look like root hairs on the outside that really just increase this surface area and kind of, make that a little bit more efficient and more effective. So that is, these, not only is the root taking up nutrients and water, but also these mycorrhiza are extracting primarily phosphorus from the soil and having greater uptake. Now, when we look at endomycorrhiza, you can see that this hyphae has actually made it into the plant root and has now infected this cortical cell, and we are now increasing the, especially right here. So now we have, this is now basically like a straw, a direct route of these different nutrients that go right into the soil plant. Into the plant root. They don't have to go through the root hair and then kind of come in and go through apoplastic or symplastic pathways and then finally make it into the Casparian strip. All they are is just an extension. They increase the surface area. They increase the ability to mine the soil for more nutrients, particularly phosphorus. All right, next we have bacteria. Bacteria are going to be the simplest life form. And so if it's the simplest life form, we would expect this to also be the decomposers of the simplest of those plant material, at least the sugars and the proteins. They don't possess the ability or the complexity to break down a plant or like a tree stump, right? So if you can think about a leaf breaking down, we would think that it would take many of these organisms. We would have a bacteria that come in and break down all the simple sugars and proteins. And once those are broken down, the thing that is left over are the cellulose and the hemicellulose. Once those are broken down, what is left is the fats and the waxes. Once the fats and waxes have been consumed, that is now left with the lignins, and we would expect the fungi to come in and take over that. We do have some benefits of these bacteria. As I mentioned, nitrogen fixation. Most of our rhizobiums have this symbiotic relationship with legumes where they fix atmospheric nitrogen and then provide that to the plant in turn, the plant provides them sugars and proteins in order to continue fixing this nitrogen. One of the problems with bacteria is they're very pH sensitive. So if you have a more acidic soil, then you are going to minimize your bacteria populations. And if you don't have a good pH and you think that you're going to apply these rhizobium and you can't figure out why your plant is not doing so well, it is likely a pH problem. Just some different bacteria, and it's kind of important to understand that, these are part of antibiotics, so they do play another role kind of in humans as well. We need these bacteria in order to kind of make sure that we're healthy. So in the same sense, you can think that we need these bacteria in order to make sure that our plants are healthy as well. So just kind of a look at some microscopic images of where we had these fungi and these bacteria, these microorganisms. That's why we call them microorganisms, because we require a microscope to see them. Just to kind of give you an idea of like what these might look like. And these are actually inside your soil. And not only is it just like these are inside your soil, but these are like in abundance within your soil. And so you have a lot of these microorganisms, and think about what it takes in order to like perform these functions, and why we need a lot of these in order to break down these materials so that we can continue this carbon cycle. So as I mentioned before, the substrate, bacteria break down the simple compounds because they're simple organisms. Fungi break down the complex compounds because they're complex organisms. And then we also need to be aware that there's an oxygen requirement for both of those different organisms, whether they're aerobic or anaerobic. And then within aerobic and anaerobic, are they obligate or are they facultative? So we have simple bacteria, complex fungi in two different environments, and then the ability of these bacteria and fungi, are they dependent upon oxygen? Are they facultative? Can they does it matter if there's oxygen or not? They'll still continue to perform that respiration. And so it appears that less oxygen, so these are going to be anaerobic, and that fungi might end up being more aerobic. They require oxygen and water in order to continue to function. Soil moisture and temperature, like this is just kind of a common theme that we've been through. If there's not enough water and the temperature is not right, nothing happens. So we need water and temperature in pretty much every one of our scenarios in order to improve that biochemical reaction rate. And then to look at the influence of soil pH. Remember that bacteria don't like acidic environments, but fungi do. And so as long as we can keep our pH around neutral, somewhere between 6, 7.5, then we are going to have a good balance. And all of these microorganisms are going to have an environment in which they can all thrive and work together as a community or as an ecosystem. I might put this in here just as something to refer back to kind of think about some of the things that you can do to improve these populations, and then also some of the things that you can do to decrease these populations. So don't do this. Do this. So this is kind of what we focus on when we're thinking about improving soil health and increasing that soil organic matter. Next, we move into our microfauna, our nematodes. These nematodes are going to be these unsegmented microscopic worms. We'll see this in the next slide, but there can be parasitic ones, And there can also be some beneficials, but we're mostly concerned with these parasitic ones because they feed on the roots. And if they kill the roots, then we don't get any nutrient uptake, we don't get any water uptake. So poor roots equals poor plant growth equals economic loss. Next, we have these protozoa, and these actually feed on the bacteria and the fungi. So these are kind of to keep everything in balance, but also at the same point in time, we need these bacteria and these fungi so that we can continue to break down those carbonaceous materials. And here in this picture, this is a picture of the nematode, and we actually have some fungi that is actually trying to kill the nematode as an energy source. So there's a balance between this. You have to think about if you can get at the microscopic level, there are microorganisms that are undergoing the same struggles that humans are. We are all looking for food. We're all looking for water. We're all looking for our own space. And we're all trying to live together while we do that. So having the right environment and providing enough resources for each of these different microorganisms so that they don't have to compete with each other is actually going to be very beneficial for us and increase that growth. Next, we have our macrofauna. So macro meaning our larger organisms, and these all play a role. Sometimes we don't know what they are. They tend to be pests as far as what we consider for humans, but they were here before we were, like as a whole class of species. They were here before we were. They played a major role in where we are now. And so we really don't need to be getting rid of these because they do play a role. Sometimes we might, given our crop production system, and maybe even like termites, we don't want those tearing our houses down, right? We don't want mites killing our plants. But in the larger grand scheme of things, these macroorganisms play a role in breaking down the material and decomposing some of these materials that need to keep the environment down. If you were to take these macrofauna out, nothing would decompose, and we'd be living in a pile of trash because nothing decomposed. It would be plant material everywhere. We wouldn't have any soil because they didn't decompose. So while they do play a role, sometimes we are going, we're not going to get rid of our earthworms. Those are important. But like snails and slugs that feed on some of our plant tissue, we don't want reptiles and moles. I have a mole in my yard that is just wearing it out. And I didn't take care of the problem early, and so now I'm stuck with it. But, these all play a role in some decomposition process that continue to cycle so that we can all live in this environment. And this will end Module 2.3.2. You can now complete Quiz 2.3, and this should prepare you to complete Exam 2. This is going to end all of Module 2, and this is kind of the setup into nutrient stewardship and nutrient cycling. So we went from how the soil forms, some of the physical properties that improve soil health. If we improve soil health, we need these microorganisms to decompose this plant material. And in the next one, we're going to talk about nutrient stewardship and nutrient cycling and how we can kind of supplement that rather than having to rely on chemical fertilizers or synthetic fertilizers. All right, that's it.